How are you doing, man?
I'm hanging in there. I'm just making it work. Just been teaching and trying to just figure out some different stuff to do online. That's why I started doing these interviews because I figured everybody's, kind of home more. So I might as well do some interviews with some people that I admire and like to get to know more, So I
Cool.
thought of you. And I appreciate you doing this.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for asking me. I appreciate you
Yeah,
asking. Very
absolutely.
cool, man.
So where are you? You're in New Jersey?
No, I'm in Manhattan.
Oh, okay. How's that experience been through the pandemic?
It's kind of deep. Um, I mean, right now, let me see. I'm on 6th Street in the East Village. So normally, this area is like a huge party area. I mean, you've got a large amount of, ordinarily, a large amount of college students who are out, like at restaurants and bars, and like especially on the weekend. I mean, I usually try not to go out of my apartment on the weekend unless I have a gig, because it can be intense, just going from
Right.
place to place. And the thing that's funny now is that they bumped out these restaurants into the street. They've basically taken over a lot of the parking, which that's not a lot of fun having a car
Right.
here. But those places are full. I mean, they're completely full of people dining and eating and just having a blast like regular. It just looks like basically a
Hmm.
normal every day. Every night looks like a normal weekend night. It's kind of crazy,
Right.
even though the schools aren't open. But man, back in March and April and May, it was a complete ghost town. There was nobody in the street. I mean, I don't know if you recall, there was a curfew here for a while.
Hmm.
So
Right.
everybody was in, by 8 o'clock at night. And it was that was really strange. This is also strange. So it's all kind of strange, I
Right.
guess. You dig what I'm saying?
It's interesting to think about what the state of music is going to be like when things get relatively, back to normal. I don't think it'll
Yeah.
get back to the way it was, obviously, but I mean, do you have any predictions?
Oh wow. Not
Go
really.
deep right off the bat.
Yeah, well, that's good, man. I think well, one thing I know is that I have thankfully been able to do some gigs. So that has been, just on a personal level, that's been super helpful. And some of them are, I mean, they're all outdoor things. There's nothing is indoors, of course. Um, and they're all like concerts for the most part, which is cool. What is really interesting to me is, of course, number one, that people are coming out to hear music because they're just starved for something,
Right.
to ease the soul. Really, I think.
Right.
And then the other thing is the way that music is. How do I even say it? Is the way it's sounding to me, or the way it feels to me, like as a group endeavor, is a lot different than what it was feeling like before the pandemic. It almost in a way feels more honest, more thoughtful, and deeper, because I think we're, who knows when you're going to get the next chance to play, a lot of times, and you could say that that's true anyway, right? But the thing is that I know that before I was working nonstop, so you can get into a mindset of like, okay, another job, got to go. Okay, learn this music, play this music, finish the gig. Okay, tomorrow I got to get up and fly someplace, do the gig, come back. Okay, next day I got to go and do this. Oh, I got two this day or whatever,
Right.
And so at a certain point, it's not that you don't care for the music. It's just you're kind of on this roll. It's not really. I wouldn't say a treadmill is the wrong word, because it's of course you're having fun, and the music is the best
Right.
thing you could be doing. But we don't have that now.
Right.
So that maybe in a way it makes each performance a little different. And of course, everybody wants to give 125%, which doesn't always happen. When you're
Right.
working night after night after night after night, even with the best players, sometimes they'll show up and they'll just be like, yeah, whatever, man. I'm here, man. I'm tired. I just got off a flight from Japan, and I'm just
Mhm.
here. I'm just gonna play, saxophone
Right.
player, maybe. Anyway, so yeah, I think the point is, I guess, when it comes back, because I think it will come back. As long as as long as there's a place to play, you're going to have musicians who are going to want to play, and you're going to have audiences that are going to want to hear it. So I guess I'm just really looking what's going to happen when it gets too cold to play outside at this point. Yeah, that's going to be kind of the test, you know. I mean, who knows? I mean, I doubt we're going to have any kind of vaccine or therapy for all this, you know, anytime real soon. So we might just have to hang through the winter. And if we can do that, then, you know, I think coming out the other end, it won't be the same, but I think it will be great. Yeah, for musicians. We just got to hang in there. That's the hardest part, I think.
Yeah, and then the indoor dining in New York, that it's not allowed at all until they don't have a definitive date where it's going to come back, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I don't know. I don't work for the government, but my feeling is that they're not going to do it until there is, you know, some kind of substantial evidence that either this thing is mutating and passing on, or there's therapy or a vaccine, or they can show that the rate of infection is low. They've already shut down restaurants and bars in my neighborhood because of you know, just they're flouting the rules. They're letting people inside and the whole 9 yards. So, you know, they're pretty serious about it. I actually played a gig the other day. It's an outdoor thing, but sometimes the musicians would you know, slip inside just to sit down for a few minutes. And you know, we got told you can't come inside anymore because if you're in here, you know, they'll take away our license. They'll shut us down. So, you know, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, honestly, you know, unfortunately. We just got to hang in there, man, you know.
Yeah, find ways to make it work, you know. I see you doing some concerts where you're streaming online, right? It's just you and maybe a few other guys in a room and you're streaming.
Yeah, I've done a few of those with Pat Bianchi and Byron Landon. It's always been Pat's group. And we played together quite a bit now over the years. And that's in a space where nobody goes. I mean, it's not a public space. It's somebody's basement. And it's in the basement of a house where the residents never go down in the basement. So, and we can keep some distance from each other. We're not like in there, you know, shaking hands and stuff. Everybody steers clear, and we just do the stream and then, you know, get out of there and go home. We did 3 of them. We did 2 of them on our own just to do something, and we did 1 for the Blue Note. So
nice.
Yeah, that was fun. That was cool. I've done some solo guitar concerts. Like I call them mini concerts. You know, I do them. They're sponsored by this educational video company called Mike's Master Classes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so I've been doing videos for Mike's off and on for years and years and years. And you know, they were thinking, well, what can we do in this time? You know, initially the thought was, let's do something just so people have some music to listen to, and players have some, you know, playing to do. Well, of course, anybody could just, you know, go live on Facebook and do it that way. But, you know, I also do it as a promotion for them. And I was doing it once a week for a while. I've gotten kind of busy, so I've fallen off it a little bit. But that's fun, and that's totally off the cuff, man. I'm never, you know, if I was to actually, I suppose if it was it's weird, if it was a paying gig, I might actually work on some stuff to do. But basically, I like the idea of, hey, you know, maybe a few people tune in, maybe nobody tunes in, maybe a lot of people tune in. But I'm just going to, you know, kind of play and see what happens. Right. So I find that more interesting than sitting down and preparing a program of, you know, 8 or 9 tunes and here's this song from 1949 or whatever, you know. It's just, the information is cool, but the idea of preparing and then presenting in that manner, it doesn't really appeal to me solo guitar-wise, you know. Which is crazy
donations?
Huh? Yeah, yeah, we take
You take
donations.
donations?
Yeah,
online?
yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
where you
yeah,
go with
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
How has
yeah.
that been? How's the turnout for that been?
You know, I mean, it's some folks are really principled about it, and they give money just like they went out to a club. And other folks are just like, oh, free music, cool. You know, let me scroll through and watch, 35 seconds of this, and I'll go watch 35 seconds of something else. So I mean, it let's put it this way: if that's all there was, I don't know. I don't know how much I would do it. I might look for something else if that was the case.
Right. Yeah.
There's a great saxophone player named Jeff Coffin, and he's played with all these kind of like heavyweights, Bella Fleck and the Flecktones, and he's really big in that whole Nashville scene. And he was saying that if he's got to play for tips, he'd rather do something else, because he says that's a hobby. If you're playing for tips, it's not a profession. It's a hobby. And he said, I have a profession that I like to do, and that did whoa touched the wrong button, man. Look out.
Yeah, it happens. It happens.
It does happen. Whoa. That kind of struck me a little bit. Just trying to figure out the way forward in all this. But I guess it's the same for everybody, man. We're all trying to figure it out, right? We're all trying to figure out, okay, what's working. Well, things might be okay if it goes on for 6 months, but if it goes on for a year, how is that going to work? I mean, I know a lot of people that have left New York. They fortunately they had some other place to go, but I mean, basically starting in the middle of March, there was no work here at all until the beginning of June. Things started to open up a little bit, and now it's like, I think it's like if you can do some of these outdoor things, it's not a bad thing. We'll see how long it lasts.
Yeah, it's like you said, we gotta wait for the colder months, and that's kind of the big question: what's going to happen when that that time arrives? But
that's going to be the test, man.
Yeah,
that's going to be the test. We'll see.
Got to keep figuring out ways to make it work.
But I mean,
territories.
It's funny, man. It was cracking me up, man, because years and years and years ago, I ran into some friends of mine that I went to school with for a couple of years, and they kind of came down to a gig I was doing, and they surprised me. Oh man, it's been like 30 years. How you been? What you up to, and all this stuff. And this was around, I can tell you what it was. It was like 2008, 2009, around the time of the Great Recession. Mm-hmm. And they all had, professions. They had jobs, and they were like, man, I lost my gig as vice president of blah 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 blah, and I'm looking for another job now, and I've been on the hunt now. It's going on 9 months. I'm looking for a job. And it got me to thinking, like, as musicians, when you finish your gig and pack up your instrument and walk out the door, you are actually unemployed. So we kind of get used to it. It's like the idea of like, okay, well, let me see. I'm looking at my calendar. Wow, that's looking pretty thin. Okay, wow. And then, I don't know if there's much you can do about it. Maybe, go hang out a little bit or something. But we're kind of a little more used to figuring it out as we go along, I think, which is an advantage in this climate, is what I'm trying to say.
Right. That's a great point. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. It's kind of like what our vibe is already, so.
Yeah, exactly. So we're adjusted. So, I mean, I've known about you for a long time. I've always been a huge fan of your playing, and I've known that you've had a very impressive career. But, as I was doing more research about you, I didn't realize that you've had, like, a really fascinating childhood that I wasn't aware of.
Oh, yeah.
So if you don't mind, would you want to maybe start out with that, just bring us through a little bit of your childhood and maybe connect that into how you got introduced to music?
Do I have to pay for the therapy part of this, man?
Uh-oh. I don't know.
No, I'm kidding. It's a joke.
Hopefully.
Yeah, it's like,
hopefully we don't.
Yeah, it's hilarious, man. You're like, oh, what? No, it's just the way you.
Well, I saw it. I was like, wow, that's a deep. I saw like your childhood. I was like, oh my god, that's crazy. I thought in a good way. I mean, it looks really cool. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. Well, my family moved around a bunch. How it happened, why it happened that way. I don't know. Except I do recall my parents both saying that they were nonconformists, so they just did whatever the heck they felt like doing. I think.
hmm
They were both scientists, and then my mom, when I was born, she had a good gig. She was like one of the first women to be in she was on track to be vice president of research and development at some big chemical company,
Wow.
and she just bailed on the whole thing to be a stay-at-home mom. And so my dad was constantly kind of shifting around. I think he was trying different things out, and he was in some situations I think he didn't like, and so he got out of them and then found something else. So anyway, in consequence, we did a bunch of moving. So, I wasn't born on the East Coast. I was born outside Chicago, and they had my father. It's kind of crazy. He had built a house from scratch, like actually a pretty nice house, big at least to my recollection. I have some pictures of it under construction. I have pictures of him, like after the foundation had been laid, like putting stuff up, putting walls up, and I guess they worked on it together. Anyway, it was really out in the country, and if I wanted to see another kid, we had to get in a car and drive, and there was only like one other family even close by that had kids, so it wasn't like a lot of it was like me and the rabbits and the dog and the cat kind of thing. It was kind of funny, man. It was cool. I was very sheltered, I guess, from that standpoint. So we moved from there. And my father and mother are both from the sort of small town northeast. My father from New Jersey and my mother from Pennsylvania, near New York. So my dad got a gig in New York, in Yonkers, New York. So we moved to Dobbs Ferry from the country. That was like, culture shock. I think I was like 3, something like that. And then from there we moved to Hastings on Hudson. So we were like kind of constantly moving around. And at some point, I don't know what happened, but after being in Hastings for about 8 years, my father wound up getting a contract to go do some work for the U.S. government in India. So all of a sudden we packed up our stuff and we moved to New Delhi, India. So I lived there for 2.5 years. It was like, I guess when we were supposed to go, I was 10. And on our way to India, we were flying out of JFK, and we were supposed to fly through, what the heck was it? I think we were flying through Istanbul and then to New Delhi. Anyway, the plane hit an air pocket and dropped. They said it dropped more than a mile in about 10 seconds. I mean, it was a 747, and if it had been a smaller plane, it would have crashed. So basically, it was we were cruising along. It was super bumpy. It was like all the lights in the plane went out, and I heard this tremendous whoomp kind of sound. My seatbelt snapped, and I flipped and went back and landed on my back, fortunately in an empty seat, and fortunately right smack in the seat, not on the sides. My father broke his neck, his vertebrae in his neck. Nobody died, fortunately, but they had to turn around and go back. So we had already rented out our house in New York, and we wound up going to stay in country in Pennsylvania, my grandmother's place. So we were there for about 9 months, I guess, while my father recovered. So that was kind of pretty dramatic also, Anyway, so then finally we wind up in India, right? We got there and spent 2.5 years there, and then came back to New York. And from there I moved to D.C., and then the rest is whatever it is. But the India thing was really, really interesting on a lot of levels. I mean, I think already between the airplane accident and winding up staying out in the countryside, that he was those were pretty eye-opening events, you know, for me as a kid. When we got to India, I remember we got to the airport, and it was the middle of the night. Our flight was delayed or something, and it was supposed to be somebody there to pick us up, and there was nobody there, and there were all these basically beggars hanging out just outside of customs. So you go through customs, and then there's like a row of really, really skinny people, skin and bones, with their hands out asking for money, you know, and I'd never seen anything like that, you know, growing up where I grew up. So that was like a huge shock, I think, you know, for an 11-year-old kid. I was like, oh my God, really? And I think, you know, that was informative, just in terms of understanding some things about the world, maybe, that I would not have discovered had we just stayed in New York. You know, because that's a pretty sheltered existence, all things considered, even though it was just outside New York City. You know, it's still the suburbs. So music-wise, how all this stuff kind of played out, you know, was funny, because I think that sound of instruments like the sitar, the tabla, the sarod, the harmonium, all these things were really, really present. They were present not just when I was in India, but even before, because you got to remember, this is the end of the 1960s. Right. This is the Beatles with all their, you know, connection with Indian music, and George Harrison, and Ravi Shankar had a huge hit. Or three in the U.S., you know, playing pop tunes on the sitar. So I was already interested in this. I mean, you know, like the Rolling Stones had, you know, all this kind of music. And if you were to go a little bit farther afield, you'd look at, you know, Miles Davis. You know, you'd take a look at his stuff, like with Badal Roy and, I forget who the damn sitar player was right now. It's not Ravi, somebody else. But this kind of a sound, right? It's very open, modal, kind of twangy, strange, sustained sound, and I loved it. I was already playing the guitar, and I played a few other instruments coming up. You know, I was lucky because, or maybe fortunate, as I was just recently told. Somebody said, "You're not lucky, man. This isn't random. You're fortunate." I was like, "Okay, whatever. I don't know. I don't know what that is, man." But you know, at that time in the school system. In New York, in particular, there were music programs for every student in those school systems. So you could learn about an instrument. You actually had to take an instrument. If you know you could play at all, they stuck you in an orchestra. So I wanted to play saxophone, but they said, "No, man, your teeth are too messed up. You're gonna have to play a brass instrument." So you know, I did a little trumpet, a little trombone. It was, you know, I wasn't good, but it was something. And we had a piano in the house. This guy that my dad went to work for, the contact, had spent some time in India, and he brought back a sitar. So we would go over to this guy's house. My dad would have his meetings with the guy, and the sitar would be over in the corner. And I'm already playing, you know, some folk and rock stuff on the guitar. And pick up, what is this? Wow, this is really cool. So I had a chance to play around on it. Of course, you know, and so now guess what? You're going to India, man. Wow, okay. At first I was really excited, and then I was kind of like, oh, I got to leave all my friends, and I got to, oh, India, what the heck is this going to be? I told my mom, I said, I want to learn how to play the sitar. She said, well, you know what, why don't you learn to play the guitar first, and then we'll talk about the sitar. So, you know, it's like, thanks, Mom. Well, you know, hey, maybe that happened for a reason. I don't know. Anyway, there's music everywhere. At that time in India. I don't know how it is now. I'm sure it is actually probably the same. I mean, literally everywhere. You got people blasting their radios all over the place, because where we lived was in like a sort of a developing suburb of Delhi. So there's lots of construction workers, and then if you walked, you know, a few blocks up to the main road, you were on, you know, a road with trucks and taxis and all kinds of stuff, and you could get into the town pretty easily. You could actually bike into Old Delhi if you were willing to, you know, to spend some time on a bike. But there was music everywhere, and you know, I didn't know what it was. I just know the sound was interesting, and even like truck drivers they'd be driving their trucks and their buses and stuff, and they would have these loudspeakers, like old school loudspeakers on the outside of the bus, blasting their music, you know, and it would be singers and sitar players, and I had no idea what it was, but it was a great experience. Looking back, it's really funny because there's like such an international community of people working for all these different governments. So it was definitely not like let's go pitch a tent on the beach and you know be one with nature. It was you know we were at a level of income where you know it was a good school, and a lot of international students went to the school. American International School was what it's called, AIS. I had a funny thing. A number of years ago, there was a cat who was booking Yoshis, and I was out there, and he came in to meet the band, and he said, "Man, you know, I think you might know my wife." I was like, "Really?" He said, "Didn't you live in India?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, here, let me show you this yearbook picture," and he showed me this like class picture, and sure enough, I was in school in India with this guy's wife like many years ago. It was kind of a funny thing, you know. I was like, wow, that's kind of deep. So anyway, the point is that there's all different kinds of people there, and it was actually a little bit of culture shock coming home, because you know, coming from something that was basically the world, you know, like all kind of everybody together, and coming back to this like a very white suburb of New York. I was looking at people that I knew before I left, and I'm looking at them like, wow, really? You know, it was deep. I mean, the whole experience was like that. So anyway, that's like in a nutshell. And I ramble on, as I tend to do with this kind of stuff, you know. But
Fine, it's good stuff.
it definitely, you know, that it's and I'll kind of cap it off with this. The question that I hate the most is, where are you from? You know, people will say that. They'll be like, so where are you from? You know, they think, well, you're from somewhere. So like you grew up. I mean, I know people that are from Philadelphia, and believe me, they're from Philadelphia, you know.
Right.
I know people that are from D.C. They're from D.C. No question about it. I know people that are, you know, been living other places for many years, but they're from a particular thing. I'm not really from anywhere, man. We moved around so much. It's like, what do I say, you know? So you know, it's like I just say I'm from planet Earth, you know, and then everybody kind of laughs. It's like, God, you're weird. And I'm like, yeah, you have no idea, you know.
That's what fascinated me, though, when I was reading about you. I mean, your childhood was so eventful in terms of just how much you moved around. I mean, it's, you know, you really experienced a lot within, you know, 11 years of your life, and it's kind of astonishing. You know, it's really cool.
No, thanks, man. I think that's how my folks looked at it. I think they were like, everything is an adventure. Even though they did not seem to be particularly adventurous. I think maybe they were just doing what they had to do, and they made it seem like an adventure, you know? It's like, hey, guess what? We don't have any place to live. This is going to be an adventure. Hey, let's go on an adventure, you know, like this kind of thing. So anyway, it was.
Did either of your parents play music?
You know, this is the weird thing, man. Like, so my mother doesn't, and her family, blood family, is not musical. I had a couple of aunts who were very musical, and they were very encouraging. And on her side, on my father's side, I didn't know them as well. We didn't spend that much time with them. But when I was 28, I asked my dad. He had been an amateur musician. He had been a classical trumpet player. So he had actually gone to Oberlin for trumpet, for classical trumpet, and he bailed on it. He said, man, the other players are too good. You know, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'll look for something else to do, which is how he wound up doing what he's doing, right? Well, I asked him, I said, man, I don't get this. You're a scientist. Mom is a scientist. We don't come from a musical family, and believe me, I've known people from musical families over the years. But I was like, man, what is this? What is this? And he said, he was very offhand about it. Like, it didn't even occur to him at all. He said, So, man, you're well, maybe I'm not. I didn't do it as a musician, but my aunts and uncles. I have 11 aunts and uncles, and they're all musicians, or they're
Wow.
artists. Yeah, yeah, which kind of knocked me out. I was like, oh, okay, so it's got something genetic or whatever. I don't know. It's strange,
Right.
but I always liked it. He always liked it. He always liked music.
Hmm.
So it was man, there was a family. I mean, I got a chance to play a lot of music actually in India, just, kids jamming. And there was a family that was there briefly. Maybe they were there for 6 months or so. This was at a time when the U.S. government would bring bands to play for all their functions. So if there was a function at the embassy in New Delhi, they would have a band to play. And I guess this was before the time of the service bands, if I'm not mistaken. It had something to do with like working for the embassy. Anyway, long story short, there was a family that was a musical family. It was like a mom and dad and, I don't know, 3 or 4 kids, and they all played, and they had a band. And so they would travel that part of the world on the U.S. government dime, playing all these, like, okay, there's a cocktail party for the ambassador. Okay, fine. They go in there. Oh, there's a dance. So the kid that, and I wish I could remember the guy's name. It was so brief and so long ago. But the kid who was the guitar player was about my age, and he was really good. And I just remember being in school, and maybe he was a year older than me. I remember him sitting down with his guitar and starting to play like some Hendrix or something like that.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh wow, that's really really cool. And then somebody said, I've heard you play. You can play that. I was like, really? Okay, I'll try. So, but it was just inspiring, actually, and interesting to see because I'd never seen anything like that before. Even though there were
Yeah.
musical families in Hastings on Hudson, I mean, it's quite a few of them actually. There's something in the water in that town also. I don't know what it is. It's kind of crazy, but anyway, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is. Yeah.
So you moved back to New York from India, and at this point you're already playing guitar. So what kind of stuff were you into initially when you started playing, and how did you eventually get more into jazz?
Right. So I think at first it was kind of like the Beatles were big, and all the stuff on the radio had a guitar on it. So I learned. I said I wanted to learn how to play the guitar. My father bought me a nylon string guitar, and I took some lessons. So I learned your basic chords, C A G D, that kind of stuff. And it was interesting. The guy he was a big fan of spirituals, like African American spirituals, and so I learned all these African American spirituals as a kid. Just we would sing them and play the chords and stuff, and learn how to strum and finger the stuff. And that was kind of the introduction for me. And then after that, it was all rock and roll, man. It was Johnny Winter, Hendrix, Santana was the thing that really got me. I mean, I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. The sound was incredible, and that was around the time we were getting ready to move to India. So you got to figure this is 1970. Well, 69 is when that airplane accident happened. So it was 1970 when we finally got there, beginning of 70, and it's like how do I say it? Like the guitar was just in the air, man. Everybody was playing the guitar, so it was all rock and blues and evil ways, 2-chord vamps, stuff with a groove, and that kind of just stayed where it was. I mean, I think I liked Grand Funk Railroad a lot. I
Nice.
mean, living in India, there's no TV, man, at that time in 1970.
Right.
So it's like you had your record player and your guitar. So, I'd write tunes and, jam with friends and listen to these same records over and over and over and over again. And one of the records was Woodstock that had been released. So I listened to the Star Spangled Banner, Jimi Hendrix, like I don't know how many thousands of times. Anyway, so that's a very different kind of thing than somebody that grew up playing jazz. Come back to New York. And I'm in school, and there's these players, and they're like, this is the jazz. We're the jazz band. I'm like, wow, what is this? What is jazz? What is this jazz thing? And they all seemed like they really knew what they were doing. And of course, they start playing, and they seem to have this incredible control of their instruments. Of course, these are like junior high schoolers, so they probably really sucked. But to my ears, it was like, wow, what's that?
Right.
So I started hanging out with this friend of mine who lived in Rye, New York, and he actually came from a pretty wealthy family, and I would go over to his place every weekend, and we would play, me and him and his friends, and he's the one that kind of turned me on to the band Chicago. We played a bunch of those tunes, and I started understanding a little bit more about harmony because he was a piano player and an organ player, and he's like, hey, man, this is a major seventh chord. Ooh, wow. This is kind of deep. And around the same time, I had another friend who was really into Mahavishnu Orchestra, and I'd never heard Mahavishnu Orchestra. So, he put on Birds of Fire for me. And, I was already listening to, all these, they're not great jazz guitar players, but they are great guitar players. Johnny Winter is an incredible guitar player. The blues, and I love that. That music was actually very popular here in New York in the 1970s. The Allman Brothers, Johnny Winter, Rick Derringer.
Right.
Led Zeppelin. All these heavy rock groups. So. Anyway, so to hear somebody take that sound and do something with it that was just kind of mind-blowing in terms of the technique. John McLaughlin, I heard that, and I was like, oh, my God, what is this? So that led to Electric Miles Davis, because there was a tune on Big Fun called John McLaughlin, and checked that out. And, wow, what's this? And that kind of, in the process, a lot of my friends and I were listening to the British progressive rock, which was, Yes, which was a group that I particularly liked, with Steve Howe, another great guitar player.
Oh yeah.
A little bit of Genesis, which Yes was really the group that was interesting to me. Todd Rundgren, Utopia.
Oh yeah.
All this kind of through composed stuff that was pretty complex. It was classical music played with electronic instruments, basically. Then around that time, we moved to D.C., and that's where I really got into like more straight ahead jazz. And I first started hearing players who were, from that generation and from that style of playing. One of my father's colleagues knew I liked music, and he knew I was sort of into fusion, I guess, and so he gave me a Best of John Coltrane record. I think I was 16, and that really changed my life, because I was like, Train had the sound and energy of like a rock guitarist, but with a different feeling and a different groove, and of course a lot more sophisticated harmonically. So that was kind of it for me. And I got lucky with that. Actually, this was luck in a weird kind of way. This is a crazy story, right? So my friends in New York, one summer, the summer before I left to move to D.C., these friends of mine went to this youth camp. Now, you have to understand that growing up at this time, we didn't really have a lot to do in this town. So we were always kind of looking for alternative entertainment. And one of those alternative entertainments was to go to this local youth group where there were girls. And of course, if you drank enough underage beer and indulged in some various other things, it would be hilariously funny to be in this youth group, right? Now, some people might not find that funny, but for us at the time, of course, it was just one other thing to do when you're bored out of your mind.
Right.
So just by happenstance, these friends of mine found out about this other youth camp that was going on down on the Delaware shore at Bethany Beach, which is, it's beautiful. It's not like the New York or New Jersey beaches. It's kind of a little more clean and maybe a little more wild, a little bit. So they all went, and they told me a little bit about it when they came back, and then life went on. And then 8 months later, I drop it. Hey, I'm moving, guys. We're moving to D.C. Oh, you're moving to D.C.? Hey, we met this really cool dude when we were at the youth camp. Now, these are all my friends talking. They're saying we met this cool dude at this youth camp in Delaware, man. He lives in D.C., man. I'll give you his number, and call him up when you get there. So, after like 2 weeks of living in D.C. and not having anything to do, I've called the dude up. Hey, you're friends with my friends and blah, 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 blah. And the guy's like, yeah, man, he was super cool. He says, man, why don't you come on over this weekend? I said, I don't know how to get there. He said, well, you take a couple of buses and then you have to walk. And I'm like, I don't know how to, can you be more specific? He said, well, listen, I have another friend of mine who is coming, at the same time. And you can meet him, take the bus to this part of town, and then just wait for him at the bus stop at such and such an intersection, and he'll come. And I'm like, well, how am I going to recognize him? He said, you'll recognize him. Trust me. He's got a long ponytail, and he'll be carrying a bass. I'm like, okay, cool. So that was Ed Howard, the bass player. And he's actually the first person I met in D.C., which is hilarious because I don't know if you know anything about Ed. He's, he worked for 15 years with Roy Haynes, with Clifford Jordan, with Junior Cook, with Shirley Horn before, she passed on. We had our first band together, for example. And at some point I had a trio with Steve Williams and Ed, so that was all in the D.C. area years later. But it was just kind of this crazy connection because our friend, who is named John Moorman, who is like a kind of a rock guitar player and drummer, lives out in San Francisco now for many years. Him and his family were avid music fans, and so in his basement he had guitars, amps, basses, drums, keyboards, and a little side room that was completely full of vinyl. It was like probably a storage closet at one point, but he had basically all four walls were full of vinyl from floor to ceiling, and he had everything. I mean, he must have had, I don't know, 8,000 records in there.
Wow.
And so we'd all go in there and sit in there, and what do you want to hear? Man, let's listen to Monk Train. Oh, what's Monk Train? Okay, cool. They put it on, and wow, that's really cool. What do you want to hear? Let's listen to Todd Rundgren. So we would listen to just all this different music, and that was, if you think back on it, just having that experience alone was pretty amazing because it was so broad ranged. And then we get tired of sitting in there. We go out and we jam, we play, on whatever, right? Mm-hmm. It's just kind of like if you didn't have that connection, that maybe that never would have happened, kind of thing. It's
right.
kind of wild.
Yeah, that's awesome. So then, did you go to? I know you went to school for music. Did you go right after high school, or did you take some time off to play initially?
Well, I mean, I was doing some playing, and I went to American University for 1 year, which is in D.C. We'd moved to D.C., and that was also an interesting experience on many, many levels. And I had done a bunch of gigs with Ed and the drummer that we had, and saxophone player. We kind of had a little band, and I think I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Really, I mean, music was appealing, but I didn't know. It's like, how does this work? Is this something that's going to be viable? Of course, your parents are like, well, I don't know. I mean, do you know what you're getting into here? We don't know anything about this. How does this work, But after a year of American University and just kind of putzing around, I got into the University of Miami in Florida, and I went down there and I studied for a couple of years. I never finished because this is another crazy thing. When I would come back to D.C. after, like for breaks, the people that I had been playing with before I went, they didn't go to college. They just started doing gigs. and they were getting really good really fast. And they were also growing up, you know. It was like they were very mature. Some of them had moved out and had their own apartments and stuff. And I'm like, 20 years old and wondering, okay, I'm not progressing that fast. Maybe I'm doing something wrong here. So I just never went back to Miami. And then from there, and of course this would have been like Frank Kimbrough, who was living in D.C. at that time, and Steve Williams and Ed, and a whole bunch of young monster players. So they were going to go somewhere anyway. But it just kind of inspired me to make a shift and say, okay, why am I going to school if I'm not getting any better? That was how I looked at it. I wasn't looking at like, well, I need my degree because of a career and blah, 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 blah. I think one of my friends put it very bluntly. He said, yeah, what are you going to do? Take your degree to Dexter Gordon and say, here, Dex, I got my degree. Can I have a gig? Yeah. So, I mean, not to poo-poo schools, because I certainly have done my share of teaching, but in educational institutions. But that's kind of how that whole thing panned out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So was there like a certain gig or a certain just opportunity that arose that kind of solidified the fact that you wanted to do music as a career?
Yeah, well, the way I looked at it was this. When I got back from Miami, it was late summer. I'd stayed down there and done, like a bunch of pop gigs, basically. Like there was a lounge gig in a hotel that somebody had contracted me for. And I was doing that, and then when that ended, what am I going to do? I'm in Miami. Somebody said, we're going back north. Do you want to ride? And it was like, when are you leaving? They're like, well, we're leaving like later on today. So, left the place I was living in a total disaster. Sorry, packed up my shit, got in the van with them, and drove back home. So when I got home, I really didn't have a plan. I was like, I don't know. I'm sitting at my folks' house. I'm like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And at some point after being there for roughly 4 months, maybe it was even less than that, actually. My mom basically threw me out. She was like, you're going to be 21 years old. You can't just be hanging around the house. You got to get the hell out of here. Get a job. You're on your own. So, that was like, oh, shoot, right? So I had to look for something to do. And, I knew a few musicians from before, and I'd by this time, my friend Ed had moved up to New York. He'd gotten a grant, actually, to go study with Buster Williams, so he was gone. Wow. But I knew a few other people, and so I would try to get together with them, and then somebody had a little gig somewhere or a jam session, and wow, I like playing with you. Maybe we should try and get some gigs. So we started looking for just restaurant gigs, just go around, try to find a gig somewhere. And I wound up doing a bunch of that, and at the same time having a cheap place to live. So somehow I was able to make it work, and going out to hear music all the time, like all the great players, as much as I possibly could. And I think at that time, I was listening to these players who were a little older than me and hearing how great they played and thinking to myself, well, I'm going to give this until I'm like 23. And if I'm not playing well enough to start to support myself a little better, then I'll just find something else to do. And anyway, that's kind of, I never really stopped. Right. It's just the phone kept ringing, and I was like, every time I'd be like, oh yeah, I don't know, maybe this is the wrong thing to do. The phone would ring. Yeah, can you play tonight? Yeah, sure. I'll play tonight. So that was the decision was kind of made for me in a way, I suppose. Yeah.
I mean, and you've played with a lot of big name people. So who was kind of like the first person that you played with that was, like that was like a little bit of a bigger name, and you were like, oh, okay, my career's starting to go places?
Well, I never thought that, actually, to tell you the truth, Mike. I never felt like, wow, man, this is great. Yeah, I'm on my way.
Right.
There was always a lot of trepidation and uncertainty, like, okay, yeah, that was really good, that situation, but I don't know what's going to happen now. My first one was in D.C., and it was with bass player Keeter Betts. Now, I had already been doing a bunch of gigs and was a working musician in that area to some extent. But somebody recommended me to play with Keeter in his group that he had with a vibes player named Lenny Couget and a drummer named Eddie Fife, I think it was. I think that was who was playing. And then eventually it was really Keeter's group, and he had Bertel Knox playing drums. But Keeter was the bass player with Ella Fitzgerald for like 30 years. I mean, he was the guy that, all that group of people with Oscar Peterson and Herb Ellis and Joe Pass, he was the guy that they would call if Ray Brown or Niels Henning was not available. They'd call Keeter. And Keeter was so cool, man. He would just crack me up all the time because I was so nervous, man. I was like, Keeter Betts, oh my God,
Right.
wow. And of course, I'm sure, I'm going to get fired. I'm positive I'm going to get fired. And he just kept calling me. I was like, and I'm scratching my head instead of thinking of it as a positive, like, wow, this is really great. I kept thinking there must be something wrong with him that he keeps calling me for the gig. So I remember I would ask him, as young players sometimes would do, Keeter, how did I sound? Am I okay? Did I do okay? Was it cool? Was it cool? And he would just laugh and look at me and say, you sound like you always sound, which is an answer and not an answer at the same time. He really knew how to deal with it. So Keeter, and that was like a lot of really straight ahead stuff. And he was super open, man. He's probably the first one of any real note. I mean, I play with a bunch of great players in D.C. that D.C. players would know about, but maybe outside of D.C., not so much,
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I started going up to Baltimore to kind of hang with some players up there, and that's where I met Gary Thomas, the saxophone player and flute player. And we did a bunch of jam sessions together. It wasn't really a gig. It was like I'd go up there to this place called the Parrot Club, and it was all these great players. Tom Williams, the trumpet player, Charlie Young, the alto player, Gary, Walt Namath oftentimes was playing bass. Sometimes his cat Jeff Harper was playing bass. Anyways, all really, really, really good players. And what they were trying to do was, or it felt like at the time, was to take standards and kind of play in between the cracks of the harmony. And Gary was especially good at that, Gary Thomas. Like, he had this way of playing that he'd play all these notes that really, if you were to analyze them, you would say, well, how does that fit with the harmony? And yet it made perfect sense. And he was able to dip in and out of the harmony. We called it playing in the cracks, basically, And then he started calling me, we'd play duo gigs. He'd play flute, So at one point he wound up getting called to play with Miles Davis. And he got his own record deal for Enja Records. This would have been in the mid-'80s. And he called me up. He said, I said, hey, man, what's going on? He said, man, it's great you're working with Miles. That's fantastic. He said, yeah, man, listen, I got a record deal with Enja, and they told me I could get whoever I wanted, so I'm trying to bring some folks along with me, man. So would you be interested in doing this record date? And I was like, are you kidding me? Yeah, of course. And that band was Rini Rosnes on piano, Gary, myself, Anthony Cox on bass, and Tane on drums.
Wow.
So that was like baptism of fire for me. That was like the second time I'd been in a recording studio in my life. It was like, hello,
Wow.
and the music was very challenging. It took they were all hanging out after the rehearsal. They were like, hey, you want to go hear Joe Henderson? We can all hang. I was like, yeah, I want to, but I'm very afraid right now, so I better go work on this music,
Right.
Yeah. So that was kind of and then of course I guess the other big thing was meeting Joey Defrancesco.
Right.
And that because Gary's thing was, it would be considered pretty avant-garde, and that had a certain kind of a flavor to it and a certain vibe to it Joey's thing is much more straight ahead. In fact, when I first started working with him, I really was questioning, should I keep doing this? Because it's we're playing blues and standards, and Gary's stuff was like pretty out there yeah, on a lot of levels. But I said, well, you know what? I'm going to stick with it. It's good, and of course I'm really glad I did, because first of all I learned a lot. Joey being the incredible genius that he is, but the way that came about was also fortuitous. So here's a good one for you. I'm going with my then wife to the beach. It's a Sunday. We're living in D.C. To get to the beach, you go to the Delaware shore, the Maryland shore. It's about a 2.5, 3 hour drive. And on Sunday, it could be longer with the traffic. So basically, you're not staying in a hotel. You go, you stay on the beach, you get all dehydrated and exhausted, and then you get in your car and try not to fall asleep on the way home, right?
Right.
So we get about, I don't know, man, maybe a couple of miles from home on the highway, and it's just jammed. It's mobbed. I mean, it's 11 o'clock in the morning, and it's you can't get there from here. So what do you want to do? Let's screw the beach. Let's go home. Fine. So we go home, and when I walk in the door, this is before cell phones, of course. There's my answer machine light is blinking, and I play the message, and the message says, hello, this is Charles Cassells from the Charlene Jazz Society. We are doing a 100th anniversary of jazz celebration at the Kennedy Center, and we just found out that they need a guitar player tonight.
Wow.
So, like, if I'd have gone to the beach...
Thank God for that traffic jam.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy, right? And the thing that really, I told this story to somebody else recently, the thing that was, I think, I couldn't tell you for sure, but I think one of the things that made Joey take a look at hiring me as something he wanted to do was that I was told that there would be a sound check at 4 o'clock. So I showed up at 4 o'clock and there's nobody around. I waited until about 4:30 and I said, well, what time is the gig? 8? Okay, I'll see you at like 7:30. So when I showed up, of course, Joey was there, and he was like, where were you for sound check? I said, I was here. There was nobody here, man, so I went home. And he just looked at me, he said, I like that.
Nice.
Like, you like that? Really? Okay, all right, great. Anyway, so he called me up a few months later, and he had some gigs at a big outdoor concert event in the D.C. area at Fort DuPont. So I did those, and then he called me for some other stuff, and then next thing we were off and running, and that lasted for 15 solid years, and then off and on again after that. Last time I worked with him was back in January, so it's an ongoing thing, you know. Yeah.
Right. So now that we're at the 80s, I had a specific thing I wanted to ask you. I've always wondered this about you, because some of the stuff that you do in your playing is a little bit unorthodox with traditional jazz stuff, like the sweeping and the fast alternate picking and stuff. Did you ever go through like a shred guitar phase at all?
No. I think for me it was trying to imitate saxophone players.
Right.
Is
like
what it was.
Sound kind of.
Yeah. And also, it took a while to tone it down. Like, it was pretty wild and pretty intense. Like, I listened to some stuff that I'd done when I was like 20. Somebody had their little recorder up, and they were and it sounds terrible. It sounds really edgy, super on top of the beat, really kind of almost angry sounding. But I think I was trying to sound like Albert Eiler or something, at the time on the guitar. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's just where it's coming from is a completely different vibe. I mean, I think the first jazz guitar player that I heard on records that really impressed me was George Benson, with like his records with Lonnie, that he had Lonnie Smith playing the organ. And I just really liked his sound and his feel, and I was like, yeah, that's what I like. That's it right there. Mm-hmm. That's what I like as far as that was concerned. And then the first guitar players that I got a chance to really see live that were jazz players was Herb Ellis and Barney Kessel and Joe Pass. So I got to know Joe a little bit, which was super cool. And I couldn't say I knew Herb very well, although I did work with him many years later. But they just in terms of their feeling and their sound and their approach, and the fact that the clubs were always packed when they played, and the energy that they had. For me, as a 16 or 17-year-old kid, that was an amazing thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You got any funny Joe Pass stories you want to share?
I do. It's Joe for me anyway. Being a young guy, Joe was he had a really gruff exterior, but at heart he was a really sweet guy. So he was playing at this place called Charlie's Georgetown, which was under the freeway in Georgetown, like down by the river. And Charlie's had had two rooms. They had the main room where the special artist would play, and then they had the bar, which they actually had a piano bar in there. So all the musicians would come. Local musicians would come into the piano bar and hang out and play and stuff. Sometimes the club would let you go into the main room and check out whoever was playing if they liked you. And then many times the players would, instead of going to their dressing room, the players from the main room would come into the bar and hang out at the bar, and they'd get a chance to hear some of the local players, right? So I met Joe in this way because my girlfriend at the time, this is going back to 1981, I believe. My girlfriend at the time actually had a job as hostess at the club. And, so all the musicians, of course, were like trying to hit on her. And I think she would string them along and then drop it on them, like, yeah, my boyfriend is a jazz guitar player. Well, I wasn't really a jazz guitar player at that time, but, he's a guitar player, So I got to meet quite a few of the players, kind of between those two things, And I met Joe somehow through this. And, he was playing solo guitar. So I'd go in, he was playing for 2 weeks every night. So, I went in and checked him out a few nights. And after a while, I got up the nerve to go talk to him. And, Joe, could I get a lesson from you? He says, yeah, kid, sure. I said, how much is it going to cost? He said, well, I tell you what. I'm staying at such and such a hotel. There's a cigar shop across the street from the hotel. Go in there and get me a box of these cigars. And he wrote down the name. That'll pay for the lesson, right? I said, okay, cool. When do you want to do it? He said, tomorrow morning. Come by about 11 o'clock in the morning. I said, okay, great, fine, perfect. So you got to figure. I got no money, man. I mean, I'm literally living in a closet at that point, I think. and I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, how much can a box of cigar cost? I'm thinking of like my uncle's White Owl cigars or, right. Philly Blunts or something like that, man. Anyway, so I go into the cigar shop and the cigars, they're like $250. And I just walk out. And I'm like, oh my God! Now keep in mind, this is in the 80s, the early 80s. So I go up and I'm already nervous because I'm like, oh, what am I gonna do? Well, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.
Oh, you just went without the cigars?
I just went without the cigars. Now, so of course I come in. I've got my guitar in the case, and Joe can see very clearly I don't have no box of cigars with me, man. And I think he started looking at me. He was like, this kid's like I was skinny at that time, He's pretty wiry looking. So anyway, I come in and he's like, oh, go ahead, kid, play something for me. So I played a couple of things that I'd worked on, and I played some chords that he was like, what is that you're playing? And it was like some really crazy stretch, right? He said, I can't play those kind of chords, man, because my hands won't stretch like that. I said, wow, okay. I didn't know that. Like Joe Pass, a great chord player, man. I didn't know you couldn't play those. Right. Wow, it's amazing, right? So he spent about an hour and a half with me. He just was kind of walking around the room doing stuff, and I'd play, and then he'd make a comment. So it cracked me up. He said, in regard to the sweeping stuff, the guy who was really doing a lot of that at the time was Barney Kessel. And I said, so Joe, you got any tips, man, for me on any of this? And he says, yeah, don't do too much of that Barney Kessel shit. Which cracked me up, man, because of course they're contemporaries, you know.
Right.
So comes the end of the lesson, and he showed me a few things. He said, this is some of the stuff I'm working on. You can practice that kind of stuff, you know. He said, sounds good, kid, just keep doing what you're doing, which was great for me to hear.
Right.
Comes time to pay, and I put the guitar in the case, and he's futzing around doing stuff. He knows damn well I don't have the cigars. He's
Right.
just kind of like waiting to see what am I going to do. So I'm Mr. Pass, Joe, listen, I'm really sorry, but I didn't know those cigars were so expensive, and I gave him a bunch of lame excuses, and I pulled the 20 out of my wallet, and I said, I have $20, can I give you this? And he looked at me, and he looked at the 20, and I think he saw that I was like skinny and hungry and
Right.
just kind of like a little stressed. And he looked at me, he took the 20, he said, sure, kid, just don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody I gave you a lesson for $20. And then he took another look at me and he said, are you hungry? And I said, man, I'm starving, because I hadn't had anything to eat that day. And he says, yeah, come on, let's go get some breakfast. So he treated me to breakfast with my $20 bill, which was,
Wow.
and then we kind of stayed in touch, and I would, when I had actually moved to Europe briefly for about a year, just trying to check it out. Shortly after that, and I was in Paris around the time when Keter Betts was there with Joe and Ella Fitzgerald. And I'd been in touch with Keter. Keter knew I was going to be in Paris, and he said, man, look for when we're playing there. And we usually stay at, I forget the name of the hotel. It's a hotel they had like jazz for many years. But anyway, he was playing at this big concert hall with Ella and Joe. And Keter said, man, just give me a ring. When you see that we're going to be in town, and you can come on out to the concert. So I did, and Joe remembered me, and so we were all hanging out in Ella had her own dressing room, but Joe and me and Keter were hanging out in this one dressing room, and it was really cool. And after a while, it was just me and Joe, and we're listening to Ella do her set, and he's talking about how you think I'm going to play my hippest stuff for this audience. Ella was up there singing a Tisket a Tasket, followed by Old MacDonald Had a Farm. And he was like, man, this is the top, kid, right? It doesn't get any better than this. And he said, look at this dressing room. And the dressing room was, like a typical, dressing room, funky and just kind of like right. Definitely not luxurious. He says, and listen to that. A Tisket a Tasket, Old MacDonald Had a Farm. You think I'm going to go up and play my hippest diminished scale on this? He said, no, man. I'm going to go up there and I'm going to play the melody. That's what I'm going to do.
Right.
So, and he was really cool. And with me, he was really cool. And I know people that knew him a lot better, of course. Like John Pisano had some great stories about Joe. But basically, Joe, I think, felt that he was not as good as he wanted to be, and he was always
Right.
beating himself up over that. Was what Pisano told me, actually. But he was always super nice to me, which was, at the time you don't think about it. You just think, wow, this is really cool. I'm hanging out with Joe Pass. How nice is that? And then afterwards you realize that it's it kind of meant something, in some kind of way, like not that I was special, but actually that he was special, he was a special kind of guy. Yeah.
Well, to be able to say you had breakfast with Joe Pass, that's pretty awesome. Not many people could say that,
I mean, at that time, it's a different kind of scene. I mean,
Right.
I think probably lots of people had breakfast with Joe Pass at some point or another, but I mean, it was just the way it came about was kind of hysterical,
Right.
At any time he could have told me, where are my damn cigars? No, man, we're not doing this out. But he didn't. So, I think he was waiting to
that's an
see if I
expensive
was
lesson.
serious.
Right.
And
That's
then
awesome.
I got to tell you though, man, that night after that lesson, I went to his gig to hear him play, and he tried to play those chords that I showed him that I was doing, and he couldn't play them. He had to stop. He was actually playing, and he stopped
Wow.
in the middle of his performance, and he pointed at me from the stage and say, yeah, here's that chord. See, I stopped because I was trying to play that chord. This chord did that kid right there, showed me at a lesson earlier today. And I
He called
can't
you
play.
out during the concert?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't in a bad way. It was just I was kind of
that's hilarious.
trying to hide,
That's so funny.
Yeah. But that's the kind of guy he was. He was just very. I think he was very genuine. Like he was how he was. He wasn't trying to be what somebody else, basically. If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, like I said, you've played with a lot of big-name people. I have a couple other people I'd like to ask you about, just see if you have any interesting stories. How about Bob Berg? I was reading that you played with him.
It's sad. It's so sad what happened to Bob. And I was just getting to know him when he was killed by that dump truck in an ice storm out on Long Island. And I'd done one recording that he was on. It was actually Joey Defrancesco recommended me for the recording. I've been working a lot with Joey, and Concord Records came to Joey and said, we want to put a band together with, we're going to call it the Jazz Times Superstars. So it's going to be Dennis Chambers, Joey, Randy Brecker, and Bob Berg. And Joey's like, well, who are you going to get on guitar? And they said, well, there's not going to be a guitar player. He said, well, I want the guitar player that's been playing with me. So, he was able to kind of, shoehorn me into the gig. Because, Concord Records, they kind of knew me, but it wasn't like, I suppose if they really wanted to make it the Jazz Times Superstars, they would have gotten Schofield or somebody like that, But anyway, so I had that chance, and I got a chance to meet Bob, and those guys were so cool to record with. I mean, they made sure that I got a solo on every tune, even if the producer was like, okay, so it's going to be a trumpet and then tenor and then organ and then take the head out, okay? And we get to the end of the organ solo or the end of the tenor solo, and they just look at me. They'd be like, go ahead, And they put one of my tunes on that record. Anyway, that's how I met Bob. And then at the same time, my old friend Ed Howard, the bass player, was playing a lot with Bob. And Bob was interested in doing something with guitar. And so he had called me and he said, man, do you want to do a couple of gigs with me at this little club in Brooklyn? It's just not much money, but I want to, be nice. We can kind of check it out and see how it's working. And then, of course, he died shortly after that. So I never did get a chance to do that.
Oh, wow.
So it was just that one time, really, And then after that, there were no gigs with that band. They wanted to do it. The booking agents wanted to do it as a quartet. I guess it's kind of cheaper that way. Anyhow.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome though that you had that experience, especially right before he passed. I didn't realize it was that close before he passed.
Yeah. Basically, I think the gig was a month off after he called me, so it was sometime in that period of time. Yeah. Nice. And he was cool, man. He would. Call me up on the phone. He'd be like, man, do you know this tune? Do you know that tune? Trying to put some tunes together. And actually, when we were in the studio for that Jazz Times Super Band, he had some very specific voicings written out, so he knew exactly what he was looking for. He's like, no, it's not. I know it says sus, but that's not. You just take a look at the voicing. And I'm like, Bob, I'm sorry, my reading sucks. And he said, don't worry about it, man. Mine does too. Which kind of knocked me out because I doubt that.
Right,
Seriously,
exactly.
doubt that. Yeah.
That's awesome. How about Stanley Turrentine?
Stanley, I worked with. Dave Stryker had left his band, and I worked with Stanley when Dave was kind of not in the band. I worked with him for about 3 years. Most of the places we played in. He had just moved to D.C., so we played a bunch of venues in D.C., like a week here, a week there. We played at Jazz Alley in Seattle a bunch of times. I feel like we played in Chicago. I think we did a couple of concert things, but there was never anything outside of the States. It was always kind of just around the States, and I don't know whether that was. He had a seizure, and so he had to be a little careful of his health. So I think maybe he was scaling back how much he was doing or whatever. But he used to come down. I'd be playing a brunch gig somewhere, and he would come down to the brunch gig and hang out. Sometimes he'd sit in, And he'd always ask me, because I was working with Joey Defrancesco a lot at that time, and he said, you still working with Joe? I said, yeah. Okay, cool. Then, he started calling me for a few things. And he was also very cool. I know he was having a rough time just because of his health, so he could be crotchety with people. He was never crotchety with me. He was always super cool. And if he had something that he wanted me to do differently, he would just tell me, pretty softly. Yeah, play those melodies down an octave because that's the sound. Oh, okay. Cool. Yeah, if I'd spent more time listening to the records, I would have known that. But yeah, thank you, man. So, yeah.
Nice.
That was a great
How about
experience.
Steve Gadd?
Well, the Steve Gadd thing was, once again, Joey Defrancesco recommended me for the gig. Steve wanted to do something that was like like the band Stuff. Or the Gadd Gang, actually more appropriately, with Ronnie Cuber. So at that point, he had Eddie Gomez, Ronnie Cuber, Cornell Dupree was playing guitar, and Richard T. Now, Richard T. had passed on. Cornell Dupree was really sick. So I think he was looking for an organ-based thing, and everybody knows Joey, man. So he called Joey up, and Joey recommended me. So he played him some recordings. Steve liked what he heard. He called me up, said, "Man, do you want to do this thing?" So that was you want to talk about a fish out of water for me. That was I think that Steve was looking for somebody who was more like Cornell, which I'm not. I mean, it's like I haven't sat down and worked out all those grooves and all that stuff. So that was a bit of a learning curve. There were things that he, I think, would have liked to have heard from me on the comping tip that were a little different than what I was used to doing. But I think he enjoyed it enough to keep calling me. And that band was together, let me think, 4 years? We did one long European tour, a long stateside tour, and a bunch of kind of New York gigs, and one live recording, which was actually the last gig that I did with him. And then I think he felt like it was a lot of responsibility, and so he was just like, I don't really want to do this like this anymore.
Wait, so you were on the road with Steve Gadd?
Yeah, with
With
Steve.
any funny road stories at all?
Oh, yeah. So let's see. So this is Steve and Joey and Ronnie Cuber and me. And one of the really funny moments for me was Steve's wife, Carol, came along. And so she was telling stories about Steve, with Steve there at the dinner table, like before the gig at this one place in Switzerland. And there were some pretty funny stories, but the one that really stuck out to me, that Steve I don't think he really likes a lot of attention in a way. Like, he would always split as soon as the gig was done. There would be people clamoring to get into the backstage, and he would just split. He'd sit down, cool off a little bit, drink a water. Yeah, that was good. Okay, see you guys later. And then he'd just head back to his hotel. But he doesn't talk that much about himself. I mean, you could ask him a bunch of questions and he might answer or he might not. But he loved to ask you questions about stuff. So, what about this and what about that and what about the other thing? So there was a joke that Steve loved to ask a lot of questions, right? One after the other. So his wife was telling this story, Carol, that Steve was working with Eric Clapton. And she was at the sound check for one of these gigs, out in the seats, just hanging out, waiting. At the end of the sound check, she saw Steve walk up to Eric, and Eric just looked at Steve and went like this. And afterwards, she asked Steve, "What was that about?" He said, "Oh, well, I was only allowed to ask 2 questions." That was, but that's kind of a secondhand story. Steve was really cool, man. I mean, he wanted the music to be right. He was all about, playing the tunes how he wanted to play them. And other than that, just the stories that I heard about him in his youth, I did ask him about recording on Steely Dan's Asia, because there's like music industry lore about legend,
Right.
about him just walking in and just totally killing the thing.
Right.
And he had told me he had been in the it was really about, we were talking about sight reading, and he had been in the Navy, I guess the Navy, I want to say the Navy Commodores or the Airmen and Note, I can't remember which one. I think it was Navy Commodores in the D.C. area. And he said that's where he really learned how to read, because you were reading all day, every day. That's what you did. You rehearsed all different kinds of stuff. So he said that's where he really got his reading together. So I asked him, I said, man, so, there's this story that you walked in and that you sight read the track for Asia, and you just, that was the take. It was one take. You sight read it, and that was it. And I mean, if you listen to that track, it's got these breaks, and he plays this unbelievable drum solo over these breaks. And he said, I don't really remember.
Of course.
I was like, okay. Okay.
Of course.
Yeah. But they talked, him and Ronnie talked a bunch about the, sort of the studio scene at that time, where he said, you might do 2 or 3 jingles a week, sometimes more, but a lot of times there was a gig at night or a hang, and many times after the hang, people would go directly to the studio, and do it that way. So yeah. That group, I guess that lasted. Let me see, 2006 was the first gig I did with them, and last one was 2010. So 4 years off and on. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. So the last playing experience I want to ask you about was, I was reading that you've played on a variety of different like late night talk shows. Have you ever had any funny encounters with any like talk show hosts or anything like that?
I mean, not really, because that's such a separate thing, and those were all in as part of the band with Joey Defrancesco. That was like his management at that time had gotten him on as a featured artist on the Jay Leno, on the Tonight Show, Good Morning America, the Joan Rivers show. I think those were we might have done one other one, but those were the 3. I remember the Jay Leno thing was kind of it was really a long day, because you had to get there in the morning. And, you wait around, and then they want you to play your tune, and then they want you to play it again, because they want to make sure it's the same amount of time. And then the producers would say, like, can you play it like you played it before? And we're looking at each other like, this is a jazz band, man. I mean, come on. I think for me the funniest one was Joan Rivers, because she was such a character. I mean, she was such a opinionated person.
Right.
And we were playing trio on that particular one, and I think we played Dr. Jekyll. Oh no, or maybe it was Donna Lee. I can't remember which one. It was one of those two. Like a really notey, fast kind of thing.
Right.
And we got done, and we're coming off the stage, and that's in front of a live audience, as they all were. God, it's so long ago, man. It's hard to remember. What sticks in my mind is just, coming off the stage, and it's, you go to the side, and we're headed back to the dressing room, and it's kind of dark, and we're there, we're waiting for the person to come and kind of take us to where our dressing room is, because it's a big complex. And all of a sudden, Joan Rivers is standing right next to me. And I'm like, oh, hi, Ms. Rivers. And she goes, that was great. That was just great. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. It was so great. And then she like walked off to do her thing or whatever it was, But she was cool. I think all the hosts were super cool, man. They were just like, happy to have you there and happy to be doing their gig. And we were happy to be there, too. But, yeah. And Joan's thing was actually, that was pretty easy, because that was, my recollection is that was in the morning. So it was basically, we got there pretty early, we set up a bunch of stuff, and ran through our tune, hung out for about 45 minutes, and then went out and played. and that was it. You know, that's what it was up
Nice.
with that. Yeah.
Awesome. Wow.
Good Morning America, we did a couple times. I did with Joey, I think, but I also did his musical director with Melissa Walker, the singer, and that was pretty funny because this is at Good Morning America. I guess is that CBS, NBC? Shit, I
have no
remember,
idea,
man. Yeah, I know, it's funny, man. It's but that week when they called me to do it. That week I was playing at the Old Iridium with Jeff Watts, with his band, with his quintet. The Old Iridium being up in the Empire Hotel, just north of Lincoln Center on Broadway. And so I'm doing this gig, and that, of course, that ends kind of late, and it's even the last set is at 11. You're going to get done at 12:30, and then people are hanging out after the gig. And I'm living in Astoria at this time, which is kind of a haul from the by subway from the from the west side of Manhattan. So when they called me and said, yeah, Melissa is doing this thing, and so you're the musical director. So the show, it was a Saturday morning. It wasn't Good Morning. It was a Good Saturday Morning. It said yeah, well, because we air pretty early, we're going to need you here in the studio at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, man, how am I going to make this work? I'm doing this. I told him, I said, man, okay, I'll do the best I can with it. I'm not sure how it's going to work. I explained the situation. And he was super cool. He said, that's okay, don't worry about it, man. We're going to put you up in a hotel. I said, really? Is it? I have to get to the hotel and then I have to get to the studio. He said, no. The hotel is right across the Fifth Avenue from the studio. And I'm like thinking, what hotel is it? The Plaza Hotel.
Wow.
So I walked down after the gig at 2:30 in the morning to the Plaza, checked in. It was incredible. It was beautiful, like marble bathrooms, huge rooms, all these great appointments, and fruit basket and everything. And I kind of laid down on the bed for a second, and then I got up and got dressed and went to the went to the TV studio. That was it. So I can at least say I spent 45 minutes in the Plaza Hotel. It was pretty fun.
Hey, there you go.
They didn't
Better
even
than
bat an eye. They were like, no, we'll put you in the Plaza. It's fine. Don't worry. And
Wow.
that must have been like $700 a night or something like that. Maybe more. Who knows?
That's awesome.
Yeah,
So I like to end these interviews with kind of like a speed round of some quick questions just to get to know some of your preferences a little bit more. But I have one last question I want to ask before that. So at this point in your life, when you like sit down and practice and stuff, do you have sort of specific stuff that you like to work on at this point in your life?
For sure. The first thing is I'm still getting asked to play a lot of fairly complicated music. In this pandemic time, I've actually been doing some gigs with saxophone player Benny Wallace. And Benny's melodies are really hard to play on the guitar because they jump around. There's nothing scalar. Everything is chromatic. So it's like boom, ba-doo-ba-dee bom, bo-ba-doo-bip, ba-doo-bip. This kind of a thing, and they're all quick, and he wants me to play them with him. So I spend a lot of time working on that kind of stuff, working with Stan Killian also a little bit. And Stan's music is, you have to work on it. You can't just show up and sight read it. It's complex. You have to figure out how you're going to do it. So I spend a lot of time working on that kind of stuff, and that, of course, is also good for your chops. Because it's not easy. You got to figure, it's like basically a workout to practice some of this music. So I'll work on that. If I don't have something like that, I'll work on some classical guitar stuff because I think it's good for the sound. Like I've got a Bach fugue I've been working on for a long time, and a bunch of the Sohr studies, some Carcassi, and a few exercises just for positioning and keep the pressure low so I'm not hurting myself. And coordination. I work on sight reading from time to time because I always get my butt kicked, and then I say, why haven't I been working on sight reading? So I try to do a little bit of that. And then sometimes I work on playing through tunes or transcribing solos on tunes that are complicated. Like I'm still working on Giant Steps and Countdown and 26-2, those kind of John Coltrane things. And I work a lot on bebop melodies also. So it's I'm just trying to kind of catch up, basically, with some of the stuff that I didn't get a chance to do as I was coming up, just because I was busy, and you know, I was kind of learning as I went. Yeah.
Right. So before, when you were talking about the classical stuff, and you said keeping the pressure low, are you referring to like the finger placement?
Yeah,
On the
yeah,
fretboard?
left hand, so that you're just as a technical thing, but you're not actually squeezing the neck between your fingers and your thumb. You're kind of
Right.
hanging on the string and allowing your wrist to be straight and finding the right angle for the fingers, depending on what you're playing, so that you're not hurting yourself. You know, basically avoiding doing stuff like this with the pinky. And some of those classical things are, you know, they're like repetitive kind of things where you do, like, you know, 2 and 1 and then 3 and 4, and you're kind of going back and forth. And you want to make sure you're not doing this, you know, flying off the neck.
Right.
You're kind of trying to stay really close. So I'll do it in a mirror. You know, it's tedious, but I like the result.
Have you had any experiences with any sort of like hand injuries at all?
When I was younger, and once again, I got really fortunate. I was working by the time I was established as a professional player in the D.C. area. At one point, I was working between 7 and 10 gigs a week, all different kinds of stuff. So my hands would get tired, and a lot of these gigs were not kind of what you would call like a lightweight situation. You were really expected to play, you know, like really
Right.
hard. So I got done with this one set in this club, and my left hand was tight, it was sore. I was rubbing my hand, and somebody in the audience saw me doing this, and they said, "Are you having problems with your hands?" Turns out they were a physical therapist that specialized in artists and musicians, dancers, that kind of stuff.
Oh wow.
And so they showed me just a bunch of exercises. They said, well, you know, a normal person should be able to put their left hand back kind of like this. What happens with guitar players is you're playing like this. These become short. This gets stretched, and then you start to lose strength and flexibility. Well, so she showed me a bunch of exercises like this kind of stuff, all these different stretches. And then that really helped. That actually kind of fixed the problem, in conjunction with trying to lighten up the left hand so it wasn't squeezing the neck so much. And then a number of years later, I was having a circulation issue with the left hand being cold versus the right hand. So I did some research, and I found a bunch of exercises to open up the shoulders and the blood flow coming basically from your neck down into your hands, and that helped a lot. So the long answer to a short question is yes, but no. I've been able to get through it okay.
Does that circulation issue have anything to do with like the strap around your neck?
I don't really know, man. I mean, I never went to see anybody about it. I stopped using a strap for a number of years. Because of that, I actually felt that I was getting sore up here.
Right.
So I used a classical leg stand. I tried the whole, like, let's switch to the left leg. That didn't really work out too good. I switched to the right leg, but with a stand. And then after a while, I went back to using a strap and standing up and playing. And that actually seemed to be the best. When I practice, I'll use a strap, and if I get tired, I take it off. You know, it's kind of monitor it and be aware of it. The classical thing really helped a lot, and I wound up going to study with Michael Lorimer on the advice of a friend who was studying with Lorimer. I had gotten done with a 6-week tour playing with this East Indian tabla player, Sandeep Burman. His music was really brutally physical. It was all on acoustic guitar and like steel string, and everything was fast and everything was notey, and all of it was in like Indian rags, so I had to relearn, you know, like where the fingerings were for everything, and the melodies would be like 10 pages long. It was this kind of thing.
Wow.
And he was good at it, so you know, if you made a mistake on the bandstand, he would stop and hold out his hand like this. He'd hold out his hand like this, and he'd go, "Money back." Like, in other words, I'm paying you to do the job, and you're screwing it up.
Right.
Money back. He was kidding, but, you know, that happens to you a couple times. Anyway, the point is, between that and doing this Tim Garland record, which was also really complicated, hard, physically difficult music, but between those two things, I felt like I needed physical help. So this buddy of mine said, "Why don't you check out this cat, Lorimer?" And he's the one that showed me about the hanging on the neck and get the pressure right. The first time I went in and played for him, he just laughed. you know, I played something. He was like, no wonder you're having trouble. I was like, man, you know, here I am. I'm on all these records. I've been making a living as a musician for all this time. You know, what do you mean? You know,
Right.
and so anyway, it took some time to figure that out, to put that into practice. But you know, I think it's just a matter of being proactive about that kind of stuff. If you're having a problem, it's not going to get any better by ignoring it. So you got to figure out how you're going to deal with it. So yeah.
Right. Awesome. Cool. All right. So I like to just do like a little quick speed round of some questions. A lot of them are asking for like top 3 favorite things. If you can't think of 3 right off the top of your head, feel free to say more. But could you pick 3 favorite guitar albums?
Jim Hall Trio, live at Bourbon Street with Terry Clark and Don Thompson. John Scofield, Blue Matter. Let's see. I don't want to leave anybody out, but I'm going to say Joe Pass, The Big 3, which is, I think, with Jake Hanna and Ray Brown. Yeah, trio record.
Awesome. How about just non-guitar jazz albums? Just 3 favorite jazz albums in general.
A Love Supreme by John Coltrane. Miles Davis, My Funny Valentine live in concert, and Shirley Horn, Here's to Life.
Nice. Awesome. How about classical? You have like 3 favorite classical pieces?
In terms of the guitar, or in terms of
just in general,
yeah,
just classical music.
There's that Pavan by
Ravel?
I think it's by Ravel, yeah. That they've actually kind of turned it into a jazz tune, you know. But that's very beautiful. I really like the Goldberg variations, Bach. That's really, really beautiful. And you can't go wrong with what's the one that was in that movie? It's terrible. I can't think of. See, I'm getting old, man. I'm forgetting stuff.
Which movie?
It's Platoon. It's British composer. He wrote it during the war.
Benjamin Britten?
It's a really, really beautiful, very poignant piece. Adagio for Strings by...
Oh, Samuel Lord Barber?
Thank you. Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Yeah. So
nice. Yeah, that's a great one. I love that.
Yeah.
Nice. How about for just non-jazz albums, just 3 favorite albums?
Michelle Ndegecello's, the 2
nice.
early records of hers. Let's say Santana, Abraxas, and
That's 3. That counts.
yeah, you know, that's 2, but there was another one I was thinking about, but it's at that point there's a lot that I like.
Right,
so
right.
Yeah, I was going to say yes, Relayer would be a good one, or
okay.
Tales from Topographic Oceans. That's another one that's really good.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Yeah. How about, do you have a favorite place that you've traveled to?
I like Japan a lot. Yeah, every time I go there, I have a great experience. Helps that my wife is Japanese. I really like
nice.
it. I spent a lot of time in France over the years, off and on. I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. All right, last one. Do you have a favorite movie?
Wow. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2.
I've never even seen it.
It's completely stupid, but it's fun. And actually, I think I like science fiction and fantasy. In general, I feel like the world is so damn dark, man, that I want something to take my mind away from so much of this. And so like The Fifth Element is a movie I like.
I watched that for the first time like a month ago.
Yeah. Oh, it's great, man. It's just
it's a cool one.
Stupid fun with all kinds of crazy stuff. Lately, though, I've been getting into binging on these things. So I liked The Umbrella Academy, Bosch, The Expanse. What's the other one? Well, The Walking Dead. You can't go wrong. It's actually, The Walking Dead is probably like my favorite, and Breaking Bad also. So.
Oh yeah, so good. Have you ever seen not Mr. Robot, Doctor Who?
Years and years and years ago, the original Doctor Who. Yeah, with the phone booth, and he's going back and forth. I think I used to watch it with my daughter when she was like, 5 or something.
Oh, so you do have kids?
Yeah, they're grown though. They're old, man.
Nice. Do you have any siblings?
No, just
Only
me.
Sean?
Yeah, that I know of.
Right. Yeah, you never know. Yeah, anything's possible.
Yeah.
But Paul, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You got it,
like I
man.
said,
Sorry
I'm
it took a while to get going here, But,
Oh, no, it's good stuff. Everything you said was great. I appreciate all the stories, and I appreciate all your insights. So thanks again.
All right, thanks, Mike, and good luck with everything, man. I hope, at the end of all this stuff, we can actually get together and do some playing, because you're a great young guitar player, man. I've heard you play. Sounds so wonderful. So just hang in there, man. There's going to be an end to this particular tunnel.
Yeah.
At some point, I think.
Yeah, it'd be an honor to play with you. So really appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do it. Okay.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right,
thanks
take
again,
care.
Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks, you
Take
too.
it easy. All right, Mike. See you.
You too. Bye-bye.